You're not confused. You're avoiding something specific. That's why this feels uncomfortable already. You say you want clarity, but your days are disordered. You say you want confidence, but your words outrun your actions. You say you want meaning, but you postpone the very responsibilities that would generate it. And here's the deeper issue you don't want to name. You're watching yourself fail to do what you know you should do, and it's quietly eroding your self-respect, not dramatically, incrementally. You clean nothing, but criticize everything. You speak easily, but act reluctantly. You blame systems, circumstances, people, while negotiating endlessly with your own habits. That internal conflict is not harmless. It's training you to distrust yourself. This isn't about motivation. It's about order. It's about responsibility. It's about whether you're becoming someone reliable or someone articulate but ineffective. And the question isn't what's wrong with the world. The question is what happens when you stop avoiding what's right in front of you. You say you're exhausted. You say you're overwhelmed. You say you just want a little peace. And yet, if someone were to walk into your room, into your workspace, into the environment you inhabit every day, they would immediately see why your nervous system never rests. That's the loop. You want relief, but you keep choosing the very conditions that keep you distressed. And the question you don't want to ask, but must, is this: why are you tolerating what is clearly damaging you? Here's the unsettling truth. You're not stuck because life is unfair, or because the world is unusually harsh, or because you lack potential. You're stuck because you've made a quiet agreement with chaos. Not dramatically, not all at once, but incrementally. A pile here, a mess there. Something broken that never gets fixed. Something out of place that you keep stepping around. And every time you do that, you're telling yourself something without words. This disorder is stronger than I am. And that message accumulates. Think about a moment that's painfully familiar. You wake up already tired. You step into the room, and there it is. The clutter, the half-finished tasks, the reminders of things you didn't do yesterday. And the day before that, you feel a subtle tightening in your chest. Not panic, just pressure. You avoid looking too closely. You grab your phone. You tell yourself you'll deal with it later, and later never comes. That's not laziness, that's avoidance. And avoidance has a cost. The real problem isn't the mess itself. The real problem is that you're living inside a constant, low-grade signal of threat. Your environment is telling your brain all day long that things are out of control. And your nervous system believes what it sees. You want calm, but you keep surrounding yourself with evidence that calm is impossible. You want clarity, but you live inside visual noise. You want relief, but you rehearse stress every day without realizing it. This is where you have to be brutally honest with yourself. No one forced this on you. You didn't wake up one day and decide to drown in disorder. But you tolerated it, you stepped over it, you postponed dealing with it, and now it's normal. That's the danger, because when chaos becomes normal, stagnation feels inevitable. And here's the accountability moment you may not want to hear, but need to. You are complicit in your own stagnation if you continue to tolerate what you could set, right? There's a psychological reason this matters so much. When your surroundings are disordered, your brain stays alert, not creatively alert, defensively alert. It's scanning for problems that never quite get resolved. That constant scanning drains energy. It erodes focus. It amplifies anxiety. And then you wonder why you can't think clearly, why you feel irritable, why everything feels harder than it should. You're not weak. You're overstimulated by disorder. And you're training yourself to endure it instead of correcting it. And here's the deeper conflict. You want to feel capable. You want to feel grounded. You want to trust yourself. But every time you ignore what's right in front of you, you teach yourself the opposite lesson. You teach yourself that you can see a problem and do nothing. That lesson doesn't stay small. It spreads. If you won't confront a mess you can see, why would you believe you can confront a future you can't? Now, the solution is not grand. It's not dramatic. It doesn't require a total life overhaul. In fact, if you try to make it grand, you'll fail. And then you'll use that failure as proof that you're hopeless. That's another trap. What you need instead is a small, precise act of order. One that's concrete enough to register in your body, not just your thoughts. Here's the tool. Set a 10-minute timer. Choose one surface. Not the whole room, Not the whole house, one surface. A desk, a table, a shelf. Clean it completely, and as you do, throw away 10 useless items. Not later, not into a maybe pile away. This is important. No nostalgia. No bargaining. No, I might need this someday. You won't. And even if you did, the cost of keeping it is higher than you think. This is not about cleaning. And if you think it is, you've missed the point entirely. This is about training your nervous system that you can act, that you can see chaos and impose order, that you are not helpless in the face of your own environment. 10 minutes, one surface. 10 items gone, that's it, small enough to do, significant enough to matter. Imagine how this looks in real life. You come home, you're tired, you don't feel motivated. That's fine, motivation is irrelevant here. You set the timer anyway. You clear the surface, you throw things out, you finish, and something subtle but profound happens. The room is quieter. Your breathing slows, your shoulders drop. Not because life is suddenly perfect, but because your brain just received new evidence. I can intervene. I can correct. I am not trapped. And that evidence is powerful because order, even in small doses, reduces unnecessary suffering. It gives your mind a place to rest. It creates a boundary between you and chaos. And once you've done it once, the question shifts. It's no longer can I? It becomes why wouldn't I? This is where identity changes begin, not with affirmations, not with slogans, but with action. When you do this, you're becoming someone specific. You're becoming someone who doesn't wait for life to feel easy before acting. You're becoming someone who takes responsibility for the part of the world they can actually control. And that matters, because meaning doesn't appear out of nowhere. It emerges as a consequence of responsibility. You know better than this. You know that continuing to live in disorder isn't neutral. It's not harmless. It's shaping you. And if you don't choose order voluntarily, chaos will choose for you, and it will not be kind. The good news is that the doorway out of that loop is small and close. It's right there. 10 minutes, one surface today. So here's the challenge. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready today. Before the day ends, set the timer, do the work, and pay attention, not just to the room, but to yourself. Because what you're really cleaning isn't just a surface. You're clearing a signal. You're telling yourself that you matter enough to live in an environment that supports you rather than undermines you. Do that, and you'll feel it. Not as hype, not as inspiration, but as something quieter and far more reliable: stability. And from stability, everything else becomes possible. You think you lack confidence. You tell yourself that's the problem. If you were just a little more assertive, a little more impressive, a little more convincing, things would finally move. But that isn't what's actually happening. The deeper truth, the one you've been avoiding, is this: you don't trust yourself. And you don't trust yourself because you've trained yourself not to. You want confidence, but you practice being untrustworthy. That's the loop. And it's why you feel stalled no matter how much you talk. Let me make this uncomfortable in a precise way. Pay attention to how often you say things you don't fully mean. Small exaggerations, casual promises, statements designed to look competent rather than be accurate. You say you'll do something soon, knowing you won't. You speak with certainty about plans that haven't been thought through. You nod along in agreement when you don't agree. None of this feels dramatic. That's exactly the problem. Because every time you do it, something inside you takes note. Here's a moment you'll recognize. You're in a conversation, at work, with friends, with family. Someone asks what you're doing, where you're going, what you're capable of. You feel the pressure to present. Well, so you stretch the truth just a little. You hear yourself speaking, and even as the words come out, there's a gap between what you're saying and what you're willing to back up with action. You feel a faint tightening in your chest. You move on. Everyone else does too, but you don't, because you heard it. And you remember, that's the real problem. Not confidence, not personality. The problem is that you're quietly undermining your own authority. You want to feel strong, but you keep teaching yourself that your words are cheap. You want self-respect, but you keep violating the conditions that produce it. And then you wonder why you hesitate, why you doubt, why you feel fraudulent, even when you succeed. Here's the hard line delivered calmly, because it's true. Every time you exaggerate, you are practicing being untrustworthy. not to others first, to yourself. Your nervous system is paying attention. Your memory is paying attention. You are conditioning yourself, and the cost is real when it matters, when you need to act, when you need courage. Your mind hesitates because it has evidence that your speech does not reliably lead to action. This isn't about morality in the abstract. It's behavioral. If you repeatedly say things that don't come true, your brain stops treating your words as signals. They become noise. And once your own words become noise to you, confidence collapses. Because confidence is not bravado. It's not volume. It's not posture. Confidence is the felt sense that when you say something, it means something, and you don't get that for free. You want to be taken seriously, but you don't take your own speech seriously. You want clarity, but you blur reality to avoid discomfort. You want to feel solid, but you keep dissolving your own boundaries with careless language. And here's the accountability moment you may resist but need. You are complicit in your own stagnation if you continue to speak without regard for the cost of your words. There's a psychological mechanism underneath this that's worth understanding. Your identity is built, in part, from patterns of prediction. You say you'll do something, either you do it or you don't. Over time, your brain learns what to expect from you. If your follow-through is inconsistent, your system adapts by lowering expectations. That's not self-hatred, that's learning. And once expectations drop, motivation drops with them. Why mobilize energy for a promise that likely won't be kept? This is why empty speech is so corrosive. It doesn't just misrepresent reality to others. It fragments your internal hierarchy. The part of you that speaks loses authority. The part of you that acts stops listening. And then you experience yourself as divided, one voice saying things, another doing very little. That division is felt as anxiety, self-doubt, and paralysis. Not because you're broken, but because you've been practicing division. The solution, again, is not dramatic. It's disciplined. It requires restraint, not expression. Here's the tool, and it's sharper than it looks. Before you speak, ask yourself one question. Am I willing to pay the cost of this sentence? If the answer is no, don't say it. That's it. No justification, no performance. Silence is allowed. Precision is required. This matters because every sentence has a price. Some cost effort. Some cost courage, some cost discomfort. If you're not willing to pay, then the sentence is a lie, even if it sounds impressive. And lies weaken you slowly, reliably, without mercy. This tool forces alignment. It puts friction between impulse and speech, and friction is exactly what you need. Here's how this looks in real life. Someone asks if you can take something on. You feel the urge to say yes, to look capable, to avoid conflict. You pause. You ask the question internally, am I willing to pay the cost of this sentence? You realize you're not, so you say something simpler, something accurate. I can't do that right now. Or, I need to think about it. That might feel uncomfortable. Good. That discomfort is the cost you're choosing to pay instead of the far higher cost of self-betrayal. Or imagine you're talking about your plans. You're tempted to announce them early, to feel the reward of being seen as ambitious. You pause, you recognize that speaking now would be cheaper than acting later, so you say less. You act first, and when you eventually speak, your words land differently, because they're grounded in reality. This is how confidence is built, not by inflating yourself, but by constraining yourself. Not by saying more, but by saying only what you can stand behind. Over time, something shifts. You begin to feel weight behind your words. You begin to trust yourself. Not because you feel good, but because you've earned that trust through consistency. And that's the identity shift. When you do this, you are becoming someone whose speech is aligned with reality. Someone who does not need to perform competence because they are practicing it. Someone whose words carry weight because they are rare, considered, and paid for. That kind of person doesn't need to convince others. They don't even need to convince themselves. Their actions do that quietly. You know better than this. You know that talking without acting has been costing you something. You feel it in your hesitation. You feel it in your resentment. You feel it in the gap between who you say you are and what your life actually looks like. The way out is not more confidence, it's more integrity, practiced at the level of daily speech. So here's the challenge, and it's reasonable. Today, just today, monitor your words before you speak. Ask the question, pay the cost or remain silent. That's all. No grand declarations, no self-criticism, just accuracy. And watch what happens, not externally at first, but internally. Notice the reduction in noise. Notice the increase in self-respect. Notice how your posture changes when your words are no longer hollow. This actually matters, because a life built on careless speech collapses under pressure. A life built on precise speech can withstand it. Choose which one you are training yourself to live. Today you say you're searching for meaning. You say life feels empty, flat, strangely hollow, even though you're busy and distracted most of the time. You tell yourself that something is missing, that if you could just find the right path, the right passion, the right opportunity, things would finally click. But here is the truth. You've been circling around without facing directly. You want meaning, but you are avoiding responsibility. And the longer you avoid it, the heavier the emptiness becomes. There's a reason this feels personal, because you know exactly what you've been postponing, not in theory, in detail. You can name it. It's the thing you feel a slight tightening around whenever it crosses your mind. The appointment you haven't booked, the bill you haven't paid, the message you haven't sent, the conversation you keep rehearsing but never actually initiate. You don't need more insight to find it, you already know. Picture a moment that repeats itself more often than you'd like to admit. You're alone late in the day. The noise finally drops. And there it is, that thought you've been avoiding. You open your phone not to deal with it, but to escape it. You tell yourself you'll handle it tomorrow, when you're more prepared, more rested, more confident. But tomorrow arrives, and the weight is still there. Heavier now, because it has company, guilt, quiet resentment, a sense that you are falling behind your own life. That's the real problem. It's not that you don't know what to do. It's that you keep negotiating with the burden instead of shouldering it. You want purpose, but you keep waiting for it to appear before you act. You want motivation, but you refuse the responsibility that generates it, and then you interpret the resulting emptiness as evidence that life itself is meaningless. That's backwards, and it's costing you. Here is the hard line, stated calmly because it's accurate. Meaning is not something you discover first and then live out. Meaning is something that emerges when you take responsibility for what is clearly yours to carry. When you avoid that, the vacuum fills with resentment, not dramatic resentment, subtle resentment, directed at your circumstances, at other people, at the world, and eventually, if you're not careful, at life itself. There is a psychological reason this pattern is so punishing. Human beings orient themselves toward value through action. When you voluntarily confront what you are avoiding, your nervous system registers competence, agency, forward movement. When you avoid it, the opposite happens. Your world shrinks. Your sense of time compresses. Everything starts to feel pointless because nothing is moving. You are not failing because you lack meaning. You are experiencing meaninglessness because you are failing to act where action is required. And you know better than this. You know that the small neglected responsibilities are not neutral. They don't just sit there politely. They accumulate. They stack up. And then they begin to poison the well. You feel tired, not because you're doing too much, but because you're carrying the psychic weight of everything you refuse to do. That's exhausting and unnecessary. Let's be precise here. This is not about taking on everything at once. That's another avoidance strategy disguised as ambition. Overwhelm can be a convenient excuse. There's too much, you say, so you do nothing. That doesn't make you cautious. It makes you stuck. And here is the accountability moment that matters. You are complicit in your own stagnation. If you continue to postpone the obvious next step that is within your reach, the solution is deliberately narrow. One responsibility, one step done today, not a plan, not a system, an action. Book the appointment, pay the bill, send the apology text, not perfectly, not elegantly, simply done. Because responsibility doesn't ask for brilliance, it asks for presence. Notice what happens when you do this. The anxiety spikes briefly, of course it does. Avoidance always promises comfort, and action always demands a price. But then something shifts, the background noise quiets, the constant mental rehearsal stops. You feel a small but undeniable sense of relief. Not happiness relief, that's important. Relief is the nervous system saying, this is the correct direction. This is how meaning starts to form. Not as a revelation, but as a byproduct. You take on a burden voluntarily, and your psyche responds by granting your suffering a reason. That's not poetic language. That's functional reality. When you choose responsibility, your pain becomes purposeful. When you avoid it, pain becomes arbitrary. And arbitrary pain is what people experience as meaningless. Here's how this looks in ordinary life. You've been avoiding making a call because you're afraid of what you'll hear. You decide to do it anyway. You don't rehearse endlessly. You don't wait for courage to magically appear. You dial, you speak. Whatever the outcome, the waiting is over, and suddenly the problem has boundaries. It is no longer an infinite threat. It is a finite challenge. That shift alone changes your posture toward life. Or consider the apology you've been avoiding. You've justified the delay. You've explained it to yourself 100 times, but you know the truth. The cost of sending that message is lower than the cost of carrying it. So you send it briefly, honestly. And even if the response isn't what you hoped for, you regain something crucial. Alignment. You are no longer split between what you know you should do and what you are doing. This is the identity shift that matters. When you act this way, you are becoming someone who does not wait for meaning to arrive before taking responsibility. You are becoming someone who confronts the next right burden willingly. Someone who understands that life's weight is not reduced by avoidance, but by competence. And competence is built one small action at a time. You might tell yourself that this is too simple to matter. That can't be right. Surely the answer to existential emptiness must be more complex. But complexity is often a refuge for inaction. The fundamental truths are usually simple, and that's what makes them so hard to accept. You want your life to feel meaningful, but you avoid the very behaviors that would give it structure. You want purpose, but you dodge the price of admission. This actually matters, because if you continue down the path of avoidance, the resentment will deepen. The world will look increasingly hostile. Other people will seem irresponsible, even as you excuse yourself. And eventually, you will feel justified in doing nothing at all. That's a dangerous place to end up. Not because you're immoral, but because you've lost your sense of agency. So here is the challenge. It is not heroic, it is not glamorous, it is precise. Today, identify the one responsibility you've been avoiding. That, you could take one step on, not tomorrow. Today, take that step, book it, pay it, send it, close the loop, and then pay attention to what changes inside you. Because what you will discover, if you're honest, is that meaning doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. It grows quietly in proportion to the responsibility you're willing to bear. And the moment you stop waiting for meaning and start acting responsibly, you step out of emptiness and into a life that, while still difficult, finally makes sense. You spend a great deal of time thinking about what's wrong with the world. You notice the hypocrisy, the incompetence, the corruption, the foolishness. You can list the failures, social, political, institutional, almost effortlessly. And you might even be right about many of them. But here's the unsettling truth that you keep circling without landing on. If you're not improving your own habits, your critique is a performance, and performances don't fix anything. That's the loop. You feel morally alert, intellectually engaged, even righteous at times. And yet your own life remains stubbornly unchanged. There's a reason this hits close to home, because you've had moments like this. You're scrolling, reading, watching, listening. You feel the surge of anger. The sense that things are deeply unjust, that people are careless or malicious or blind. You shake your head. You argue internally. You feel sharp, awake, and then you look around your own space. The dishes are still there. You went to bed too late again. You showed up late. You skipped the habit you promised yourself you'd keep, and something in you goes quiet. Not because the world is suddenly fine, but because you sense a contradiction you don't want to examine. That's the micro-story most people never articulate. You feel energized by critique, and strangely depleted by self-discipline. You want the world to be better, but you resist the daily constraints that would make you better. You want justice, but you avoid the discipline that gives you the standing to demand it. And instead of resolving that tension, you redirect it outward. That's the real problem. Not that the world has flaws, but that you're using those flaws as a refuge from responsibility. Here's the contrast you need to face clearly. You want order in society, but you tolerate disorder in yourself. You want accountability from institutions, but you negotiate endlessly with your own bad habits. You want truth, but you soften your own standards when they become inconvenient. That asymmetry matters, because when internal chaos goes unaddressed, it doesn't remain private. It hardens. It justifies itself. And eventually, it turns into ideology. That's not a political statement. It's a psychological one. When people fail to correct what they can correct, they seek explanations that absolve them of agency. Resentment becomes a lens. Blame becomes a framework. The world is not just flawed, it is oppressive, rigged, irredeemable. And conveniently, that worldview explains why nothing changes at home. The danger isn't that you criticize the world. The danger is that critique replaces self-correction. You know better than this. You know that outrage is cheap. You know that moral language can be used as camouflage. And you know, if you're honest, that some of your strongest opinions arrive precisely where your own discipline is weakest. That's not coincidence. That's compensation. And here's the accountability line, delivered without cruelty but without escape. You are complicit in your own stagnation if you use resentment to avoid the responsibility of self-regulation. There's a deep psychological mechanism operating here. Human beings need a sense of agency. When agency is exercised locally, over habits, time, attention, it generates competence and calm. When agency is avoided, energy doesn't disappear, it reorients. It looks for external targets. That's when the world begins to feel unbearably unjust, not because it suddenly became so, but because you forfeited the areas where you could actually act. Chaos at home becomes chaos in interpretation. This is why ideology is so seductive. It offers moral certainty without personal cost. It gives you a role, critic, dissenter, truth teller, without demanding behavioral change. But it also traps you, because the more you invest in blame, the harder it becomes to admit that some of your suffering is self-inflicted, and that admission, uncomfortable as it is the doorway out. The solution is not to stop thinking critically. That would be foolish. The solution is to earn your criticism, to ground it, to anchor it in personal discipline so that it doesn't drift into bitterness. And that begins with something remarkably unglamorous: your habits. Here's the tool, and it's deliberately modest. Pick one habit, not 10. One, and define a minimum, not a maximum. Not I'll sleep perfectly, but I will get at least 7 hours. Not I'll be hyper-productive, but I will be on time. Not I'll fix my entire life, but I will keep this one promise daily for a week. Minimum standards are powerful because they eliminate negotiation. You either meet them or you don't. This matters because maximums invite self-congratulation and excuses. Minimums demand consistency. And consistency is what rebuilds trust with yourself first. When you define a minimum and meet it, something subtle but important happens. Your internal dialogue changes. You stop arguing with yourself. You stop justifying, you act. And action restores agency. Here's what this looks like in ordinary life. You're tempted to stay up late again, scrolling, watching, numbing yourself with other people's opinions. You remember the minimum. You go to bed, not because you feel virtuous, but because you decided. Or you're running late and feel the familiar impulse to excuse it. You catch yourself. You hurry. You arrive on time. No announcement, no moral display, just alignment between intention and behavior. And here's the key point. As you do this, your relationship with criticism changes. You're no longer speaking from frustration alone. You're speaking from order. Your words become quieter, more precise, less performative. You don't need to shout because you're not compensating. You don't need to exaggerate because your life is no longer contradicting your values at every turn. That's the identity shift. You are becoming someone who earns the right to critique by first becoming competent. Someone whose moral judgments are grounded in self-regulation, not resentment. Someone who understands that the smallest domain of responsibility, the self, is the training ground for every larger one. And this is where meaning quietly returns, not as a feeling but as a structure. You're no longer split between what you demand and what you do. You're no longer hiding behind ideas to avoid discipline. You are aligned. And alignment produces a kind of calm strength that no argument can replace. This actually matters, because a person who cannot govern their own habits will eventually seek to control the world instead, and that never ends well for them or anyone else. But a person who can set their own house in order becomes a stabilizing force, not perfect, not pure, but reliable, and reliability is rare. So here's the challenge, and it is reasonable. Today, choose one habit, define the minimum, and meet it. Do not announce it. Do not dramatize it. Just do it. And when the impulse to blame, to rage, to perform moral superiority arises, as it will, pause and ask yourself a harder question. Have I earned this criticism today? If you do this consistently, something important will happen. The world will not suddenly become just, but your perception will sharpen, your resentment will diminish, and your words, when you choose to use them, will matter more, because they will be backed by a life that is, at least in one small but significant way, in order. That's how chaos becomes responsibility, and that's how responsibility becomes meaning.